For our third video on lesson number 1, we're going to now talk about the real number properties. So we've discussed the subsets of the real numbers. We've shown how we can order them on a number line and where they're placed. And now we need to discuss various properties. Now, this is very much just a pre-algebra review for you. And in no way do we think this should be a difficult lesson for you, but it is worth noting that these types of things pop up later on in the ACT, and a lot of times it can confuse students because they haven't seen it since middle school. So it is important that you not only just learn the language, but also understand how to apply these various properties. So if you look at this concept summary that we have various properties like closure property, commutative and associative, identity and inverse, and these are properties that you should be familiar with, as well as the distributive property. We will do some basic identification of properties, but that will just be a very small part of this lesson. So let's just take a look at some of the parts of the properties here. Let's take a look first of all, some basic language like opposite. Opposite is technically called the additive inverse, where we can take the opposite of what's given to us and put it together, and that equals to 0. Or if we can talk about reciprocals, that is the multiplicative inverse. So we're taking the original number that was given and putting it in the denominator under 1. Now, subtraction is defined as adding the opposites. Please do me a favor here. When you subtract, you learned how to subtract in second and third grade, first grade, somewhere back in elementary school. This should not be an issue for you. Okay? If you're still changing to adding the negative, that's fine. It is just extremely important that you use parentheses. There should never be a point where we use double operations together. So let me give you an example. Let's assume that we had 2 minus 5. We should not have 2 minus and then plus 5, or 2 plus minus 5. Anytime you have operations side by side like that, that is incorrect. We definitely need to be working with parentheses in a situation like this. Another no-no is this. If we have 2 minus a negative 4, at this point we should know that it is 2 plus 4. I do not want to see double operations of this same nature, like 2 plus 4. That is technically not how we write mathematical language. And it's a bad habit that you may have gotten into when you learned how to add or subtract the negative values. So just be very aware of the technical aspect of mathematics, how things should be written, how symbols should be used, and operations should be written. So keep in mind, if you're dividing, which is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So make sure that you're very clear about how you set these things up. Now, let's just take a look at an example problem. Example problem 2 is just going to ask us to identify the various properties. And if you look at part A, you can see that we have 3 parts that are being regrouped. So that's how associative and commutative properties are different. With associative, we're grouping 3 parts. With commutative, we're only rearranging 2 parts. So you can see that the solution is associative property. And for part B, anytime you multiply something by 1, you get it's the same number, so that is the identity property. So these are properties that you should become very familiar with. So let's take a look at a couple examples. So sample problem number 2, you can go ahead and pause the video and work on sample problem number 2, and you can also work on sample problem number 3, parts A, B, and C, knowing the language in italics. So go ahead and pause the video at this time. Okay, if we look at sample problem 2 part A, we have 5 times 3 equals to 3 times 5. So we had 2 values that were being rearranged. So this is the commutative property. And notice it's not commutative, it's commutative. So just keep that in mind when you're spelling it. And if we look at part B, you can see in this step we're taking 5 and multiplying it times the first part, and then we're multiplying it again times the second part. So this is what we call the distributive property. So just basic identification of properties is extremely important. Moving on to sample problem number 3. So let's see what these different languages refer to here. Sample problem number 3, part A, says the difference of 4 and -5. And if we recall from our early math classes, difference means subtraction. So we're going to take this and we're going to say 4 minus, and since it's a -5, we need to use parentheses. And we should know that anytime we negate a negative number, it changes to a positive number. And so our answer would be 9 in this case. Alright, part B says the quotient of 12 and 1/2. So we're going to take 12, and the quotient is division, and 1/2. Now, it's improper form to leave a fraction in the denominator of a fraction, so we need to rewrite this. And if you remember, and some of y'all may have had some sort of little trick to remembering this, if we're dividing by a fraction, we want to change that to a multiplication problem. So we do this by changing it to multiplying by the reciprocal. So we're going to flip the 1/2 to 2 over 1. And of course, 12 times 2 is just simply 24. And then lastly, we have another difference problem. Again, this is subtraction, but this time it's with 2 negative numbers. And of course, we want to use our parentheses to separate 2 operations. And then we want to change that to an addition. So -6 plus 12 is going to be a +6. So hopefully you had no problems with those. Okay, the next thing that we want to touch on is what we call unit analysis. Unit analysis is whenever we have properties or operations that we have to perform giving a unit of measure associated with it. Sometimes these unit of measures can be different, and so we have to convert. This is going to be extremely important for those of you who are taking chemistry this year or next. Unit analysis and conversion is a very important part of science. So if you can see some of the examples here we're given, we need to keep the unit of measure correct. If we have like terms or like units of measure that can cancel out between the numerator and denominator, we need to do that as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at a word problem here that actually uses some unit analysis. So what I want you to go ahead and do is just read through sample problem 4, do the best you can to answer parts A, B, and C, and then come back and watch the explanation of each one of these. So go ahead and pause the video and work on these at this time. So if you worked sample problem number 4, let's take a look at what we're doing here. It says you're exchanging $400 for Mexican pesos. The exchange rate is 8.5 pesos per dollar, and the bank charges a 1% fee for making the exchange. So part A asks us how much money should you take to the bank if you do not want to pay the exchange fee from the $400. So basically what we've got going on here is we've got our money plus the fee that we need to take to pay the bank, which gives us a total. So we need to figure out what that fee is going to be. And so we're going to take the $400 and we're going to multiply it times 1%. And if you remember, we have to write that 1% as a decimal, which this is going to give us $4. So we now have $400 that we're exchanging plus a $4 fee, which is going to give us a total of $404 that we should bring to the bank. What we want to know is how much in Mexican pesos that's going to give us. So we're going to take $400 and we want to figure out how many pesos it's going to give us. And if you recall, we can get 8.5 pesos per dollar. So if you see the word per, that's like a division problem. So we're going to take 8.5 pesos per $1. Now, in this case, the unit analysis, or the units of measure that are the same, are the dollars. So we're going to actually cancel those out. And we're going to simply multiply 400 times 8.5, which gives us 3,400. And the unit of measure that is remaining is the pesos. So we're going to have 3,400 pesos to take on our trip. Now, when we return from our trip, we have 425 pesos left. So we want to know how much we can get in dollars. So this is going to require us to change the exchange rate so that we are canceling out the appropriate one. So it was 8.5 pesos per dollar. Now we want to make it $1 per 8.5 pesos. So I'm going to have $1 per 8.5 pesos. And now the unit of measure that is the same on the top and the bottom are the pesos. And this is going to create a situation where we're now dealing with only dollars. So the unit of measure left is dollars, and that would be $50 that we would receive back from the pesos. Okay, so what you've gone through here in this particular video is just some basic properties of real numbers that you should have learned back in pre-algebra and algebra 1. And we've also touched a little bit on language and terminology that you should know, and then also unit analysis. And you can see this final problem is an application problem, which will be very important for you to become comfortable with. So that ends our videos for lesson 1. You can now move on to the notes and videos for lesson 2.